Scott. I think that your analysis is also quite useful as well. And of course, we have to learn the lessons. We have to find out where went wrong. But most important, I think at this critical moment, we probably also need to look forward and really look for how we can set aside the differences and how to really work together to stop this downward spiral of the world economy and also the livelihood, lives and the livelihood of the humankind. And I really think that you're right. We need this trust building. Very important at this critical time. We are all global villagers on the planet, and we are facing attacks from Mars, and we really need trust of each other for the survival. And I totally agree with you that we need to strengthen the multilateral mechanisms such as the WTO and even WHO to really lead us and coordinate the global efforts combat this pandemic. So thank you for your comments as well. Now I'll have Mary Lovely to speak. Mary Lovely is a non-resident senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, also a well-known think tank in the U.S., and a professor of economics at the Syracuse University. So it's your time, Mary. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. And again, I'd like to say how happy I am also to be with you today, how important it is for us to be together and to continue to work together to try to move the relationship forward. I think our previous panelists have raised so many interesting points. Jeremy emphasized the importance of the Phase 1 deal from his perspective. And David brought in some concerns about the Phase 1 deal, which I think are widely shared among those of us in the international economic community. John pointed out that, of course, this is not the only epidemic that we have faced, and also warning us of the great challenges that we face, including xenophobia, which is, of course, is a huge concern to both of our economies and societies, and our ability to continue to work together, as so many of us have done over the past 20 years. I think Scott was most blunt in raising the stakes of and the challenges that we face, both domestically and internationally. And I think that his analysis was both clear-headed and clear-eyed, but also quite sobering. I would like to say a couple of things first about the Phase 1 deal, and then about the possibility for cooperation. On the Phase 1 deal, I agree that it's much less than it might have looked at to many on the outside. There are some very significant challenges that are raised by this, not simply reaching the purchasing targets, but also the very existence of the purchasing targets. What they say about managed trade, about the role of SOEs in meeting those goals, as Chad Bown and I have written about in the past. But also just the general approach to how trade will occur between the two countries moving forward. Having said that, and acknowledging that these criticisms of the Phase 1 deal are valid, it is still very important for our governments to work in harmony toward fulfillment of the Phase 1 deals, even as I think becomes increasingly obvious to everyone, even if the timetable must be relaxed to acknowledge what is happening. Both to the U.S. economy, the Chinese economy, and to the global economy more widely, which will also have a slowing effect on our two economies. I think if nothing else, this pandemic has reinforced the view that so many of us have long held, which is that we live in a global system, that none of us can isolate ourselves from each other. And that means that as representatives of the two largest economies in the world, we have to keep our eye also on the fact that we live with many other countries that are watching us, watching our behavior, and that they're getting what happens to their economies and getting their economies restarted really very important to the prosperity of our own nations. So I think continuing on with Phase 1, seeing a continued movement toward Phase 2, whatever that is, and it will be greatly delayed by this, is still important progress. The fact that underneath the top line, we have a lot of bureaucrats on both sides, managers working together to make this happen is extremely important. I think we cannot take for granted the numerous connections that we have both in the academic world, the think tank world, the business world, to try to move the relationship forward. I think that, and this is my second point, there is an immediate and common need for the U.S. and China to work together to create public goods to ameliorate the effect of the pandemic. And while some people may doubt that this could possibly happen, I think that it's something that we should push for. I think we are seeing some increased cooperation, as was noted by Henry and others. We're already seeing the movement of PPE between the two countries, some coordination and cooperation there that has been very important over the last couple of weeks. I think that as David, I'm very concerned about what's happening in developing countries. We're all hoping for the best, that perhaps the virus is less virulent in places where perhaps the weather is different, or the populations have been inoculized against tuberculosis. But still, we currently are dealing with a very severe outbreak in Ecuador, in the Philippines, in South Africa. There's a growing challenge in India. And of course, what's happening in Brazil. So this is just perhaps the beginning, and we need to address it as leaders of the global economy. Let me just raise a couple of things that we could work on. One is trying to create some order out of the disorder that's made about getting supplies to where they are most in need. U.S. and China have begun cooperation. We pray that the U.S. need for these will decrease, perhaps in May, and still other countries will be becoming hotspots at that time. How can we work together to get this supply chain flowing better? We talk about the need to keep supply chains moving, food, electrical supplies, energy supplies, but we could start with these most important goods. As has been mentioned, and as the Global Alert has pointed out, 68 countries, probably more even this morning, have trade restrictions on these medical devices, and we need to push back on PPE, medicines, and medical devices, and say that these supplies are really an important human right and a need that we must be concerned about those poorest countries in the world. Secondly, we're going to need cooperation to fund a vaccine and to make it available. Recent work that's come out from Bruegel, think tank in Brussels, is showing that despite the encouraging private efforts, given the probability of getting successful vaccine, we need more funds, more effort in terms of creating a vaccine to make sure that it can be produced in sufficient quantity and sold at marginal cost so that it can be very widely distributed across the globe. Even more, we should have a moonshot effort to create a vaccine that can be used against the SARS virus more widely. Most scientists will say that this is not the last pandemic, and we need to be working more cooperatively and more diligently to address what is certain to come in the future. So supplies and vaccines. I think there's a third area where we need cooperation, which is that providing monitoring of the disease. We do not know what happens to the population, how much natural antibodies are created for asymptomatic, for example, or how quickly we will see return. We've seen some resurgence in limited parts of China, but and Hong Kong, and we need to provide monitoring that can be used. We have to remember that what happens in one place does not stay in one place, that it transmits quickly, and that we owe each other this type of transparency to make sure that we can all take protection. We need to cooperate on sharing information on how to restart our economies. The United States and the Chinese economy are incredibly complex organisms. They cannot be started simply with flooding the system with credit. We have to have people out there to enjoy the services on which so much of our people depend. With China becoming increasingly a service-based economy, this requires human contact, and we have to share information on how to gradually restart our economies. David mentioned that, and Scott also, that the global recession is surely one that will, I think, astonish us with its speed and its depth. And sharing information on how to reset these economies is vitally important. Without that happening, we cannot hope to have peaceful cooperation between Europe. And lastly, I would join David in calling on the need for cooperation to get some kind of debt moratorium for developing countries. The need is acute, it will become more acute. We're seeing every day central banks using new instruments, participating in markets that they previously had not participated in. This morning, the U.S. Federal Reserve has made known that it is buying in U.S. municipal bonds without any credit rating restrictions. So they're doing things that haven't been done before to make sure that we can all survive this. And I think for developing countries, these challenges are going to be enormous. And as leading creditor nations, there has to be some type of coordinated relief to make sure that these nations not only survive this, but help us revive global growth 6 months, 1 year from now, 18 months from now. Again, we don't have an answer as to how long this will go on. So if these types of cooperation cannot be done now, I really fear that cooperation 2 years from now will be even more difficult. So I'll leave it from there with a call for cooperation for all of us to join in that as important members of civil society and continue to bring this forward to our governments, the importance of this type of joint action. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lovely, and thank you so much for calling for this cooperation. And I think that's really probably out of the most important for all of us right now, and particularly we are fighting this pandemic, and we really need, particularly, for example, find out this vaccine that U.S. and China have most advanced technology on that, and then really should collaborate. For example, that probably is our ultimate hope for control this pandemic. Thank you again for calling for this cooperation that's really needed for both countries and the rest of the world. Now I'd like to try again, Craig. I know we've been trying a few times, but really would like to hear your voice as the president of the China Business Council and the leading chamber on U.S.-China business relations.
Well, thank you, Huiyao. Can you hear me?
No, it's excellent. Okay, great.
Okay, good. Sorry for my technical problems, and sorry for signing in late and missing your introduction. So it is a beautiful spring day in Washington with flowers and cherry blossoms blooming, but nobody can go outside. And it feels, when I look at the state of globalization, very similarly, that there is a cold, cold wind blowing, and it feels like the dead of winter rather than the beautiful day that we actually have outside. So I'd like to do three things today. I'd like to first give a little bit of an overall, somewhat bleak assessment of globalization, a different opinion on phase one. I think phase one should be really valued highly, and talk a little bit about next steps. So in terms of the overall state of globalization, I think that we could start out reflecting on the words of Supachai Panichakapadi, the WTO Director General at the time that China joined the WTO about 20 years ago. Supachai wondered out loud whether or not whether the WTO could survive China's entry. Now, Supachai is no longer with us, unfortunately, But I think that if he were alive, he would change his question, and he would wonder whether or not the WTO can survive the U.S.-China trade conflict. And I think that that is a very relevant question to ask ourselves. The evidence that we have before us is very concerning. Yesterday, the WTO released an astonishing report that said global trade is expected to fall between 13 and 32% in 2020 because of the virus. The gap is so wide simply because we don't know the duration of the virus. Will we still be struggling with this at the end of the year? Nobody knows. The WTO also noted that this time around is much worse than the 2009 recession because of the restrictions on movement and social distancing mean that labor supply, transport, and travel are all directly affected. So nearly all regions of the world will suffer double-digit declines in trade volumes, but the WTO suggests that North America and Asia will be hardest hit, so China and the United States. I think a couple of things we could say. The more complex and global your supply chains are, the worse off you'll be. The more you are dependent on travel or personal contact, the worse off you'll be. The longer the epidemic lasts, the worse off we will all be. And if it lasts too long, it will be difficult for globalization to recover. So the WTO Director General said that, quote, decisions that we take now will determine the future shape of the recovery and global growth prospects. And I agree with that sentiment entirely. But when I look at what countries are doing, virtually all countries, it's hard to be optimistic. As Mary said, 70 countries have put export controls on trade in personal protective gear. And some countries are putting controls on food exports. So if you are an importer of either of those, it shakes your confidence in the global system. And as others have done, we need to think of the physicians and the nurses and the responders in Pakistan or Nigeria or South Africa who are sent into battle without even the most rudimentary protection. And if the health workers cannot survive in the third world, how will their healthcare systems hold up? So I think that is a frank assessment of where we are on globalization. I want to take a little bit of a different approach from David on phase one. I agree with him completely on the quantitative elements of phase one, that this was always going to be difficult, and in the current circumstances, particularly with the inability to sell service exports in the form of tourism or in education, that was always going to be difficult. But at least my members are very happy with the implementation of the phase one agreement across intellectual property rights, across agriculture, and across financial services. We understand that there is communication between USTR and Ministry of Finance and MOFCOM every day, or nearly every day, and that both sides are committed to making this system work. And we understand that it's actually working quite well. We, at least from my observations, the bureaucrats within each of the ministries within Beijing have the authority and the scope and the ability to implement the agreement, and they are doing so. Now, it is not, there are headaches, there are difficulties, bumps in the, but the general direction is right. And I think that we need to take relatively smooth implementation of the phase one agreement as a foundation as a confidence-building measure, as a positive move forward, both for China's domestic economy, supporting liberalization in the three areas that I mentioned, but also on the bilateral relationship. In this very, very bleak time, we need to take anything that we can as a confidence-building measure and work upon it and double down on it. And this is a time where the trade people, the globe, can really take the lead and show how this can be done. And if not governments, then business to business has a very important role to play. And at least this business association, and I know that Jeremy as well, would like to support the two governments. In terms of next steps, I think that in the immediate term, I agree with the calls previously for collaboration between our medical sectors, and particularly our drug and pharmaceutical device and scientific and academic sectors. If there was ever a common challenge, it is the coronavirus, and let us join hands to try to address this challenge. I agree with Mary that I think it's shameful of all countries to put quantitative restrictions on our protective equipment that is needed around the world, and that rather we should be coordinating a response to send the equipment where it's needed, when it's needed, as much as possible. I think over the medium term, as we go into G7 or G20, it would be a good time to talk about these issues and try to reach a consensus that now is a time where we are all in this together. And I realize that this was tried 10 days ago and did not work out as well as it could, but it is time, I hope, for another try. And I would refer people to the ITA, or Information Technology Agreement, that APEC put together some 22 years ago, which was eventually brought up to the WTO level, or the Environmental Goods and Services Agreement, which started out in APEC. Now might be a good time to consider a healthcare agreement between APEC members, and then to bring that out to the global community. Actually, no one would benefit from that more than China and the United States, the two leading suppliers of pharmaceuticals and medical equipment. And if we were to bring it out to the rest of the world, we would be much better prepared for the next epidemic than we have been proven to be for this epidemic. So let me stop there. And again, my apologies for the technical problems that I've been having. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Very good point, and I'm glad that you made all the points well understood. And yeah, I think you're right. You're saying that the trade, the phase one is still very important, and you see some positive progress on that. And the business community, particularly at this point of time, we really need the trade to sustain us together. And I remember, even after the First World War or Second World War, we had explosive growth on trade, which actually made the world recover from those devastating wars and disaster at that time. So I think now, with this unprecedented pandemic that falling upon the human race as a whole, we really need the trade and the sustainable global value chain to pull us all together. I agree what you have said. I think that's really important, and so that being the two largest economy in the world, China and the US should really work, particularly the largest two trading partner, to be responsible and sustain the world economy and do as much as we can. And thank you, Craig, for good points. Now I would like to also turn, according to this as alphabetic list, to our Chinese colleagues on comment. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Li Xiang. He's a research fellow at the Institute for American Studies at the Chinese Science and Social Science, and also he's a CCG non-resident senior fellow. So, Dr. Li, your turn, please. Can you turn on your microphone, please? You turn on your microphone. Li Xiang, yeah, please.
Yeah.
Okay, we can hear you now. Yeah, please.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Huiyao, for organizing this event. Actually, I had my hair cut. The last time I had my haircut was 3 months ago. So it's a pleasure to talk to so many distinguished people from from both sides of the Pacific. And I agree very much with Scott Kennedy that at this difficult time, we need to be humble, very humble, because there are too many unknowns in this world, and we don't know what will happen in 3 months or 6 months. We don't know. There are too many uncertainties in this world. Actually, my son is a student, first-year student, which is located in Wuhan, and so my heart has been always with Wuhan in the past months, 2 months, and fortunately, things looks to be under control now, and we are still afraid there would be a second wave of the virus outbreak here. We are not sure, and we are very sad to see that the outbreak now is in the United States, is in Europe, and so many people have died. So it's a horrible situation. And yesterday, you may say that our top leaders had a meeting about the near future, and our top leader said about the bottom line thinking. In Chinese, actually, it means we'd like to think about survival rather than recovery. So it's an extremely difficult time, and I'm not sure what things. I'm not sure if things can get better in a few months. I think it will take quite a long time, maybe 6 months, maybe longer. So the first thing I want to address is about the phase one deal, trade deal between our two countries. So yes, I think it's important. It's an important deal, but now on the side of the purchase terms, I think it's already very difficult for two sides to implement, especially for China's purchase of U.S. machinery and service. That will be extremely difficult. But on the good side is that I believe China will continue to buy agri products from the U.S. and I don't think the U.S. side will shrink. The U.S. production of agri products will shrink sharply. That will not happen. So on the agricultural side, I think we can be a little more optimistic. For the other products, I think it's very difficult for China to buy more because the current crisis is unprecedented. That's all we know. Yeah, the classic economic crisis is overcapacity. It's on the problem is on the demand side. But now we have seen the shocks on both the supply and demand side. So we have never seen it. We have never seen this kind of economic crisis. And I believe by the end of this week, the U.S. In the U.S. the unemployment rate will surpass 10 million. 10 million. So that's horrible. That's a horrible scenario, and it can be more. It can be worse in the second half of the year. So we don't know. We don't know many things. So I agree with Scott. We need to be humble, and whether our two countries can work together, I think that will be based on the good conscience and good faith. So if we don't have good conscience, if we don't have good faith to each other, the world will be much worse. So, I work for the Institute of American Studies. So that means theoretically, I must know a little more about U.S. than China. Okay. So I also have some concerns about U.S. politics, not mention the economic side. Okay, the good thing is that for the Republican Party, there's actually the primaries are already finished, and on the Democrat side, Mr. Sanders withdrew yesterday. So for both parties, it's not a problem for the general election. But my concern is that whether we can see a general election on the 3rd of November. That's a big question mark for me. So I'm, as a researcher of the U.S., as a watcher of the U.S. politics, I'm quite concerned about that. I don't know if the general election cannot be held on that date. What will happen in the U.S.? I don't know. It might be a constitutional crisis in addition to the economic crisis. So repeat, my last word, repeat. We need good conscience. We need good faith. We see the breaking of the disruption of the global supply chains has hurt so many countries. We know that President Trump has a faith in a drug, in a medicine called hydroxychloroquine, right? Yeah, he has a faith in this medicine, but we know about 70% of this medicine actually are made in India, and 90% of the API of this medicine are imported from China. So this global supply chain is very important. So we need to have good faith in keeping as much as possible to keep this global supply chain work. So this is my words. Last words. I have no background in medicine, so I don't want to say any more about the pandemic. But on the economic side and the political side, I'm very worried. So let's do something in the coming months. Let's go step by step and make decisions on what will happen. So thank you, Huiyao, again.
Okay, thank you, Li Xiang. And I think you made some relevant point as well that with the U.S. facing an election year, and now with this coronavirus pandemic, how we can really carry that domestic agenda is also an issue, but also that's impacting the world as well. But I agree with you, the trade is still the most important, that we need to sustain that. Finally, I think that we still have one more guest panelist, because we are running a bit of a behind schedule, and we actually started about 10 minutes late, so we'll extend a little bit of that. But I was told by my staff, we have 600,000 viewers online and from China and around the world. And this is really amazing that we can carry this think tank and chamber dialogue on those critical time. So I would like to have Professor Wang Yong from Peking University Institute of International Relations, also a non-resident senior fellow of CCG, to have your last word. And after that, I have a few questions from the media, which is watching, and we hope that all our panelists who stayed maybe open their screen, and then we can answer some of that in the final moment. So we'll let Yong go first.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Huiyao and CCG, to provide this very good platform for the friends and colleagues from the two countries to have this dialogue assisted by the virtual technology. That is very important. From the floor, you see, I heard the friends and colleagues are talking about the attitude, importance of the cooperation between the countries, of the countries, right? We know that the global crisis need global solution. Right? So all the world look to China and the United States are working together to give the mankind hope. Okay, that is something I think I heard, and I'm also shared it a lot. And I see the Dr. Li Xiang mentioned a word so impressed me very much. Okay, that is uncertainties. So we don't know the situation in 3 or 6 months, are not mentioned to a longer future. But we do know at this moment, something certain. We learned the lessons from the last several months. I think that is very important. I'd like to highlight, to share with the friends and the watchers of this program. Number one, the pandemic. Okay, they show us we are in single world. That interdependence and the real sense of the global village. The virus is not the Chinese virus, American virus, European virus. It's just virus. So that is the fire, the pandemic, right? The fire, not the fire on the others' yard. So that is the fire in our yard. Okay, that is something we learn. Okay, the number one lessons. Secondly, you see in the past several years, you see a lot of discussions about, big powers, strategic rivalry, ideology, you see the differences, right, driven by ideological differences. But this pandemic, tell us the wisdom. We have to recognize the non-traditional security issues like the virus, pandemic, can cause much more the deadly the cost to the mankind. Okay, this is the very deep global wide public health crisis, much more deadly than the big powers, strategic rivalry and others. And thirdly, I think this pandemic tell us how important the unity and the cooperation of the US and China to the two countries and to the world. The two largest economies, to the largest countries, right, have special responsibility to the world. Okay, to some extent, we have suffered by now from the pandemic. It's the result of the lowering cooperation of the two countries. We have seen the lowering the budget, cutting the positions, right? Retreat of the cooperation from the public health. So now we suffer, from this no cooperation. Secondly, I would like to emphasize that because that is not just about the U.S.-China trade relations, and we have to look at the fields. I think the fundamental problem with the U.S.-China relations, including the U.S.-China commercial relations, is the shortage of the political trust and the strategic trust. Okay, some people are kindly minded, the colleagues and friends, ask the questions why this pandemic has let us to waste a great chance for the U.S.-China to work together. So this seems to that is this pandemic, this public health crisis has created a chance to salvage the relationship. I just had the opposite position about this question. So we didn't have this chance because we have fought. In the last several years, we had the very prolonged trade war, and we fought with each other on all the other, the front lines. Okay, there's no such a chance. So that all the things we can expect if we can't correct, reorient our perceptions of each other, especially about the differences of each other, rebuild our the positive perceptions of each other, as pointed by some colleagues here, and we will have no more chance to cope with the crisis. Right. So to look at the last several months, we have problems. Right? When China suffered, Wuhan and Hubei suffered lockdown. Right? So that we see some media in the United States call it the collapse of the China state governance system. The China's Chernobyl, the moment. Some high-level officials called for getting back manufacturing to the United States. And we'll say that is a continuation of the public opinion as a war, even today. Right? So I think, I just had read the report from the US media, and it was ABC. Okay, the same thing like this, right? And it showed that, right? So that is as later last November, the US military intelligence has already reported the very destructive pandemic spread in China. They sent the alarmings to the U.S. government. So that is, I'm not sure that is true or not. But we have already heard a lot of the things like this, stuff like this. Right? So I think we need the more clarifications, especially on the U.S. side. About all this news to see about the news. That is not the consensus of the Chinese people, right? We have a very active social media, so that is something I think the U.S. So I think the other countries we are concerned about. No, in the last point, I would like to raise my proposals or suggestions on the how to improve the relationship for the two countries to work closer, with each other. Number one, I think the two countries, especially the top leader, should have more frequent communications, have more the telephone call with each other. Right now, we had the two presidents did talk to each other, right? I think that is good following the G20 leaders meetings. But we need the leaders talk to more in more the frank and more the friendly way. Secondly, it's very imperative, for the governments to resume the dialogue, the mechanism, which was set up in 2017. I think because of the tensions, because of escalations of the trade war, right, we have seen all these functions have big problems. Some of them has been suspended totally. Now, in order to demonstrate our, the goodwill to each other, we need to resume the dialogue right now to let it to be more symbolic. Not to mention, we need the right the channels, to have the deep discussions on the cooperation on the fighting the pandemic. Right. Mm-hmm. And thirdly, I would like to call for the U.S. government to make more and substantial the efforts to improve the political trust. And for example, to stop the trade war, right? And not to, I'm very surprised to note that some of the U.S. officials, the government agencies, still talk about imposing the trade sanctions, technology sanctions on the Chinese company like Huawei. The further lowering the limit of access to the U.S. technology. That is very inactive, at this moment, because more the people. And most of the people look forward to the countries to focus on the civil life, and the U.S. side should just stop the intervention in the issues of Taiwan or Hong Kong, especially on the Taiwan. Right, so that is very politically sensitive, to China. Right, so yeah, so I think for last point, because of time, so last point. On the, both sides, right? So we want to build a better relationship, especially, to build a post-pandemic.
Time is 1 minute.
Okay, yeah, 1 minute. Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. Right. So we need, both sides we should have an in-depth dialogue on the governance, among the civilizations, right? I think the most important things, right, is to respect the right to development of China, right? To learn from each other, either in the culture, in the political and the social systems, right? Let's work together. I think the humble be very important. Humble to be each other, respect each other. So I think that is the best hope to the relationship. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Wang. I think that you have outlined quite a lot of important view as well. I think that for both countries, U.S. and China, and of course the whole world, we should really look forward and looking for find the ways to combat this deadly challenges. That's probably the most important, and I think you're right. We really need to emphasize to face the current enemy number one, the common enemy of humankind, the coronavirus pandemic. Now we have actually concluded our panel view discussion, and now we have actually quite a few questions. I want to just go through them, and then we see each of you maybe have 1 minute to address that. We have because we started late, we delayed a little bit, and on that as well. And I don't know if Scott Kennedy is still on, but we have most of our panelists are still around. And so we have a few questions because we're viewed by, according to my technical staff, is saying that it was about 600,000 viewers. This morning we had another one in Chinese. We had 1.2 million. So you can see this social media is getting really very widely applied during this special time, and people are really concerned. People really care about this. So it's very important. We have a few points from some of our media actually also joined the viewing as well. We have one question from Beijing Review, which says that why would the U.S. Rely on Johns Hopkins Research Center to release the confirmed number of COVID-19 cases? Is this data accurate if it's just by one academic? And of course, he was basically saying that Johns Hopkins Center collect the number reported by hospitals What about if some infected people not going to the hospital? So there was one question like that. And a second question from South China Morning Post: will coronavirus global pandemic a chance for China to narrow the gap, or even maybe overtake the U.S. in terms of GDP, which I think is not going to be that fast. But given the different approaches on virus control, economic development, and political system, will this escalate the competition between the two superpowers, or accelerate decoupling as well? The third question is from China Business Network. This virus revealed that American medical supply chain is also quite highly dependent on China. So after this crisis, do you think American medical firm will reduce their reliance on China, or do you think those American firms can localize their supply chains in the U.S.? And the last question is that from China.org, that the 5G, of course, technical decoupling, 5G battles and things like that, bashing. Particularly recently, there was also it was proposed from the U.S. that they're going to, give the license for all those technical companies from U.S. to related companies to sell to China. So that's going to hurt both business and from both countries. And as we all know, that technology is now one of the best, weapon that would combat this coronavirus in terms of big data, in terms of where we can using this technology to fight this virus. So those are the four questions, and any of you maybe 1 minute too, or that we can answer those questions. Please raise your hand, and we'll talk. Okay, I see that Mary raised first. Lady first, Mary, can you?
Okay, I'll be very quickly to answer. On the supply chain issue, I think that we'll see natural forces and policy having a role. I think that every business executive is questioning the issue of dependency and thinking about adding redundancy. So I see diversification as a solution, not as the problem in terms of the commercial response to this. On the policy side, one alternative to these export bans is, of course, renewed interest in stockpiling. And there we will see how countries create these stockpiles and what conditions they put on countries as to the manufacture of these goods. For example, if the U.S. decides to re-engage with stockpiling medical equipment, will it purchase only equipment that is made within U.S. borders? So I think that we're going to see a commercial response, a private response, but that government policy will also play a role in how supply chains respond to this.
Okay, thank you. David, I saw you also next to John, maybe. Okay. You have to open your speaker. Okay.
Thank you, Henry. On the GDP question, going into this virus crisis, the U.S. economy was about 50% bigger than the Chinese economy. Yeah. So that's too large a gap to have this crisis have much effect. Both countries are going to have bad years. Whoever responds well, may put themselves on a better growth path going forward. But I think it's going to be another decade or more before China surpasses the U.S. I think this crisis is more likely to accelerate decoupling than to lead to better cooperation. So I'm afraid I don't have a very positive message. And then I would just add to Mary, I agree that companies will be looking to diversify. Don't think of this as companies coming back to the United States. If you brought all the production back, it would be hugely costly. So I think more companies will be looking at their diversity of their value chains. Are they in Southeast Asia? Are they in Mexico and Canada? So some diversification, but don't think of it as reshoring back to the U.S. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, David. And John, you're next.
Yeah, I was about to answer the two questions here. I totally concur with David that China's economy is not going to get any close to surpassing the United States after this pandemic. It's just too large a gap. It's about 60-some percentage point of U.S. size. So maybe closing a little bit, but it's not going to materially change anything. As I said, I think it's a temporary shock. Now, I do want to answer the question about situation with respect to with Huawei, as well as President Trump's recent decision to issue a license for General Electric to supply jet engines for China's C919 program. That's China's indigenous jet plane that is supposed to compete with Boeing 737 and Airbus A320. I think in general, President Trump is more realistic in terms of taking a position. On one hand, this concerns a national security issue. On the other hand, it also concerns America's business interests. Now, in the jet engine issue here, the argument is that it's not going to change materially Chinese developing indigenous engines if they're doing so. I think they're doing so. But this is a great line of business in the future because, China is the largest aviation market in the world, and C919 is supposed to have a pretty good future in China. Now, with respect to Huawei, it's an entirely different case. Here we're talking about boycotting foreign companies that buy American equipment in the semiconductor industry, for example, from Prime Materials and KLA Temple, these companies, while at the same time supplying chips to Huawei. So I think this sets a very dangerous and very bad example in the sense that if you, in the future, foreign companies, when buying things from American companies, they have to be having a second thought about, what if the United States government is going to put companies on entity list for supplying to another Chinese company. So I think this is a path that's very difficult to go down, and has nothing to do with national security interests, because Huawei is already barred from doing business in the United States. I think it's just because there are people in the U.S. administration that has been going after Huawei, in the intelligence community, in the defense community, been going after Huawei for such a long time, and they haven't really achieved their objective, and they just cannot, they won't give up doing so. So I hope that President Trump will realize that this has nothing to do with national interest. It's just a very bad example for American business, and you won't go down that path.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, John. I think that you're right. Technology is really the key component to fight these those pandemic, and we cannot decouple them. And also for the U.S. company, they're selling hugely on China on those high chips and things like that. Qualcomm has 60% of the business coming from China, so it will be a big burden as well for the U.S. company in general. I don't know if Scott has any view on that. You're one of the experts in the technology as well.
Sure. Thanks again. It's been a really fantastic conversation, and I want to commend you, Huiyao, and CCG for organizing this, and for everyone else who's been making contributions today, and for the good questions that the large audience provided. I would say just really reinforcing what others have said in terms of the changes in supply chains and where we're going. I would say what we're definitely seeing is a decentering of China from the middle of supply chains, that there will be diversification and redundancies, regional production and supplying. If we were having this conversation in February, maybe we'd be talking about decoupling and making these changes as the end all. But now that the virus is global, we're seeing global risks, and companies are going to be mitigating those risks globally, not just vis-a-vis China. But what it does mean is China's going to play a less central role in supply and production over in the future. There is, I would agree with David, still a lot of pressure in the United States to push forward with different elements of decoupling. But there's also the same pressure in China, in Beijing, to de-Americanize their supply chain, to reduce dependency on American technology inputs, and to diversify away from depending on the U.S. as a market as well. And so I think there's pressures in both places. I'll just go back to my original point, which is at the heart of this crisis is really, it's a crisis of domestic governance in the US, China, and elsewhere. Those countries and regions that had stronger domestic governance capacity have done a much better job at managing and minimizing and mitigating this crisis. Look around China's neighbors to see those success cases. Look to Germany as well. Those are folks that we need to look at as models of much better domestic governance. And I think until we really improve our domestic governance capacities in the US and China, we're going to have difficulty improving our bilateral relationship and collaborating on many of the areas that we need to, whether it's in handling the virus and the epidemic or the many other areas in which we collaborate. So I think our ability to collaborate and work on international issues is going to first require us to improve our governance at home.
Thank you, Scott. And I don't know if Craig, you have a last word response to the question as well. We have a last word from our Chinese colleagues too.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, well, again, I'd like to add my thanks to everyone. It's been a very fruitful discussion. I'd like to just comment on Wang Yong's suggestion that the United States may have, and he didn't say this directly, but he suggested that the United States may have had something to do with the Wuhan, the virus that started in Wuhan. At the same time, he called for greater trust between the two sides. And those are contradictory statements. I think it's important that we be careful not to spread gossip, rumors, misinformation, and that indeed we look at each other with a sense of humility and with trust. So I regret that statement and wish to move forward to build the platform that we have started to build with phase 1, and then move on to phase 2 and try and improve the overall relationship. But spreading rumors, gossip, and misinformation will not help. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Okay, Li Xiang. Okay, I see your hand.
Open?
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Just a very brief comment. Actually, it's not my comment. It's my talk with a China executive for a very, very large U.S. corporation. They have a very big production base in China. And I asked him whether they are going to move their production assembly line to other places. He said, my boss told me we'd like to hibernate. We'd like to hibernate in China rather than moving to anywhere else. So I think this is the choice of some very large corporation. Yeah. So I agree with Scott. In the future, there might be kind of competition. That's competition for better governance. If you have better governance, you get more of the in the supply line. So that's my brief comments. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Finally, Wang Yong, please. Briefly, yes.
Yeah, I think the future, is still uncertainty, even about the reorganization of the global supply chain. I think that all the things will depend on how we look at each other, how look at the cost and benefit of the economic globalizations, right? On the part of the global supply chain, if we are ready to pay the cost for lowering living standard, right? So I think that is something will happen. But if we can manage relationship a better way, I think we can. I think all of us will benefit from that. Right. Second point. So that is the so-called the conspiracy theory. So that we have seen that is from both sides. Someone like me, I'll always keep a watchful eye on this. So stay away from that. But the problem is that is something, is reshaping a lot of mindset about that. That is why, that's become a question. Just let the scientists to deal with that. I think that can be very good. Okay. So I think on this point, I think maybe this time they come from the U.S. So I think that just to make the situation more complicated. That is part of the domestic politics of the U.S.
Okay, I think we had quite a bit of discussion already tonight and also in the morning in the U.S. And I really want to thank all of you to spend the last 2.5 hours with us together at the CCG webinar series. But I think the dialogue and also the exchanges tonight is really relevant and important, particularly during this turbulent times, and also we are facing the enemy number one together. So how we can really work together, how we can really sustain our trade relations, how we can carry on the phase one deal, and how we can really develop the vaccine that the world is needed badly by US and China together. Those are really important questions that really we want to work together. But I think this kind of format is really a new format. It's shortened the distance. It's shortened, even though we cannot travel to each other country, given largely because of the pandemic. But we still keep the dialogue open. And I think also to build a different narrative and a new collective and also a forward-looking narrative that we're going to try to fight populism, nationalism in both countries, and really would look for still the two largest economies to work together and then to face in really the giant threat of the humankind in the last 200 years. So again, we really appreciate all of you. Thank all of you to be a part of the contributors tonight. We're going to summarize all the points. We're going to publish them again. But also we want to thank the viewers. We were told there was 600,000 viewers watched us tonight, and from China around the world, and we really appreciate their attention as well. So we hope that this is not the first time. We're going to continue the dialogue, and I think this is really paved the new way for our future mutual understanding, and will hopefully leads to better collaboration and also joint efforts in combating this pandemic for all the goodness of the mankind. And once again, thank all of you. I thank all of viewers. We hope to see you, invite you come back next time. Thank you very much.